Hello everyone. I think we can start. Today I'm very delighted and proud to welcome our prominent experts and the Minister of Justice of Ukraine to our event, EPC event, European Policy Center event, which is organized along with our partners, Ukrainian partners in Brussels. It's a mission of Ukraine to the European Union, as well as Ukrainian Prism, our very good, important old partner. And this event is a part of Europe in the World program, and actually it is organized in the framework of our Ukraine's European Future project, which is led by our senior expert, Amanda Paul. And we are doing a lot of policy analysis and hosting a lot of events dedicated to Ukraine and to support Ukraine, and including on different areas and policies like security, like defense, international support to Ukraine, as well as trade policy, enlargement policy, sanctions policy, and etc. And today's meeting today's topic is also very important. It's on Russian frozen assets, and I think it's time for more decisive actions after 2 years of full-scale invasion is now. And we can see that, unfortunately, the level of destructions in Ukraine is very high, and it continues to grow. And for Ukraine, it is getting harder and harder to secure continued international support for its reconstruction. And we can see also that the aggressor is advancing, unfortunately, and it is not going to stop until it is stopped. It is time for decisive actions in terms of sanctions policy and in terms of Russian frozen assets. And we can see already first steps from the European Union, and today was some good news as well on this, in terms of using revenues from frozen assets. But decisions on using Russian private assets and sovereign assets are still pending, and there are a lot of still hesitations and arguments about this topic, and sometimes it seems that we are stuck in arguing. And so I do hope that today's discussion will help us to address some of these hesitations maybe, and to provide some next possible steps, what we should do about Russian frozen assets. So the floor is yours, Hennadiy. Thank you very much.
Svitlana, thank you so much. We, as always, are very happy for this partnership with European Policy Center. It's our privilege, but we also would like to use this opportunity and to give a word for a welcome remark to Olga Chyzhova, chairwoman of Ukrainian Prism Europe organization. Olga, please.
Broke something? Yes. Okay, good. Thank you all for coming at such a short notice. I think that this full room really is the best indication that this topic is timely and really important and generates interest also here in Brussels, not just in Ukraine, where we are ready to use already the frozen assets. Some good news from today, you've probably already heard that High Representative Bruegel has his initiative to use the revenues. 90% of them will go to the European Peace Facility, what we need most, and 10% will go to Ukraine facility. But this is just estimately 3 billion per year. You've heard that Ukraine needs much, much more. Hundreds of billions you've heard we need for the reconstruction, but then there are everyday needs, budgetary needs that need to be covered. And let's hope that today's discussion will contribute not to just more questions on this issue, but to already some answers and solutions. Ukraine has already demonstrated that it's capable of providing very creative solutions to problems that the world is facing now. Let's solution to this one also be a good example of that, of Ukraine leading the way for the democratic societies in finding the answers to these issues. I guess that would be all.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Now we are ready to start our discussion, and first and foremost, I have to have the words of thanks to Minister of Justice, Nicolas Maliuska, for his availability on short notice for the discussion, because I think it's a very important issue to discuss. Thank you so much, and we would do utmost from us, which is possible, to make discussion lively and to the point. We have also three other panelists which are online with us. Nevertheless, we would be happy to listen to their arguments and maybe suggestions what to do with the situation we're discussing at the moment. And afterwards, we will open our discussion for Q&A. Let us do in that way. Minister, I would like you to grant us maybe 15 minutes of keynote speech. And in this speech, I would like maybe to give us an overview about current position, political and legislative, of Ukraine, about confiscation of sovereign assets of Russia, where we now at the point. Next, which might be of interest to our participants, what is the current state of play with our partners, mainly G7 and European Union, because we all know that if we have 260, 270 billion of immobilized assets, core part is sitting in banks here in European Union. So it's the point for us to understand what is the situation on the ground at the same at this moment. But before we start, let me just make a short introduction of Minister of Justice. Denis Maliuska obtained a grade from Taras Shevchenko National University, Faculty of Law. Also received a degree of Master in University of London. Since August 2019, he serves as the Minister of Justice of Ukraine. Prior to that, he was elected to Verkhovna Rada in 2019 as People's Deputy, but surrendered his deputy mandate upon the ministerial appointment. Prior to that, many important roles in private sector, development consultant, and expert in fields of technical assistance to government of Ukraine. So Denis, please give us this overview, because I think it would be important for us to start with a clear picture within of the moment.
Thank you, Hennadiy. And well, first of all, a big thanks and words of appreciation to organizers to arrange such an event on such a short notice. So that's amazing, and many thanks for you. And with regards to the topic of our discussion today, well, the short introduction. The story began exactly 2 years ago, when there was still like early days or early weeks after full-scale invasion of Russian Federation. So we contacted our counterparts, international partners, lawyers, of what could be done in terms of the legal response to the aggression. There were like hundreds of different advices, and one of them was, we need to do something and to chase after Russian sovereign assets. And the first solution on the table was, let's try and designate and get designation of the Russia as a country sponsor of terrorism, which could be an easy first step, since there is no need in any legislative effort, since such a designation could be done and is done according to the decision of the Department of State in the US. And the following consequences would be devastating. On one hand, this immediately lifts sovereign immunity of Russian assets on the territory of the US. On the other hand, the consequences of such designation, well, they overwhelm even sanctions imposed on Russia during those days. So again, that idea was our first goal. After initial steps and analysis, we understood that maybe this is not a perfect solution from political perspective and also from the legal one, since there are too many different claimants and creditors of the Russian Federation, received different arbitration awards, received court rulings to collect debt from Russia, and they were looking for Russian assets for years, unsuccessful in many cases. So that would open door for many other creditors, and probably we will get too insufficient amount as a result of that step. So we need to create something else, to think about other ways of getting access to the assets. Why it is important? It was initially we thought that the assets would be used only for reconstruction of Ukraine. We understood that the damages are significant, but probably the amount of frozen assets would be sufficient to cover the major part. But given what we have right now, and even calculations of the World Bank on the direct damages, according to the recent assessment by the World Bank, we have almost 500 billion of damages caused to Ukraine, its legal entities, citizens, to the infrastructure, cultural heritage. So it's clear that what is frozen outside Ukraine, like in the world, on the territory of our partners, would not be sufficient to cover everything. So since we get an understanding, then probably it's about, again, the number changes, but still we could account for about 300 billion of US dollars worldwide. But that it looked pessimistic at that time, but now it looks optimistic. Why is that? Our approach to the assessment of necessity changed, since right now we understand that we would significantly feel the lack of resources in 2025. So for 2024, we got quite a lot of commitments from our partners, US, EU, Ukraine facility plan. Again, today's news, quite important one. But still, we would use those funds. We really appreciate for the sources and budgetary commitments made by our partners, but we understand that the amount of funding, direct funding to Ukrainian budget shrinks from year to year. And in 2025, we cannot expect the same level of financial support for the country we have this year or we had last year. So that means that we need, in order to survive, in order to sustain the economy, we need to look for other resources. And the main source available to protect us from disaster, well, not disaster, but really pretty terrible consequences in terms of budgetary expenses. We see like one of the major sources of support, budgetary support for 2025 is Russian assets. In order to get access to Russian assets in 2025, we need to find a solution and free legal framework this year, 2024. This is crucial for us. This is crucial for country. For obvious reason, we send all our taxpayers' money to the military effort to fight a war, and everything else, like healthcare, welfare system, safeguards, my salary, educational system, whatever, is funded by our international partners. When the funding decreases, we would feel that immediately, and it would be hard to fight a war when our people won't get access to basic state services. So again, this is kind of short explanation why we became less optimistic in terms of reconstruction. We understood that some part of Russian assets shall be sent also to cover budget gap probably next year, and maybe even on military purposes, as was announced recently by EU. Since again, there is a deficit also in funding of our military efforts. Again, this is financial part of the story. There is a legal one. The legal one that was like initially the response we received from many headquarters was that, okay, this is a good idea from a political perspective to help Ukraine by using Russian assets and to explain our own citizens that we do not use your money, European taxpayers' money, US taxpayers' money, but we use Russian assets. This is quite attractive from a political perspective. But from the legal perspective, this is really challenging, almost impossible to do. After like some period of time, particularly right now, there was a sea change in this assessment of the situation we have right now. So we have more or less understanding between different jurisdictions among many lawyers that under the circumstances, the idea or the concept of countermeasures shall be applied. There are different types of countermeasures, but the basic idea is that since Russia violated international law and launched a war of aggression against Ukraine, not only Ukraine suffered actually, but other countries as well, because they have to spend their money on refugees, their businesses suffered and get losses due to the aggression and the necessity to leave the Russian market. Some of their assets were confiscated by Russian Federation. So there are losses pretty much in each and every country within the EU and on the territory of G7 countries. So in terms of, and countermeasures mean that the country which suffered, in case of especially affected countries concept, could apply countermeasures by lifting sovereign immunity of Russian assets and sending money for Ukraine needs, particularly as a way of reparations. So that idea is now becomes more and more popular, and this is a legal basis why US is pretty much strong about confiscation, outright confiscation of Russian assets. I've spent last week in the US meeting with different authorities, executive and as well Senate and the House, and we are quite optimistic about the chances perspective of adoption of the repo bill, which envisages the right of the president to confiscate Russian assets and send the money to Ukraine needs. From the financial perspective, this is not that attractive. It's only about $8+ billion US, but from the legal perspective, it doesn't really matter how much do you confiscate, whether it's going to be $1 or 100 billion. Doesn't differ much from the legal perspective. Of course, Minister of Finance would not agree with me. But again, it's a bit more difficult here in the EU for many reasons. The legal problems or legal discussions we had previously, from my perspective, a bit faded, particularly when the US became strong and some other partners within G7 also accepted and supported and endorsed the idea of the countermeasures. So legal arguments now are less persuasive in terms of not moving ahead with outright confiscation. It's much more easy, of course, to move ahead with proceeds, with profits gained by agencies, companies operating legal assets, which is the approach taken by the EU right now. The concept is simple. Since Russia since Russian assets were blocked, Russia did not expect that there would be some proceeds in 2024, 2023. So any process gained from administration of those resources, sovereign assets, shall not be considered as Russian assets protected by sovereign immunity, but could be separated from the principal amount. And under special regulation, they could be sent on the needs of Ukraine. So that approach does not envisage a lifting of sovereign immunity or somehow application of any type of confiscation of assets. This is kind of prevailing approach right now, and probably within weeks we will have necessary regulations adopted here in Brussels. We hope, at least. We will see how it goes. But this is kind of only partial solution, which does not deal much with the main idea of confiscation of the principal amount. And what we hear is different arguments. Financial, like, okay, it's not the US with 8 billions, we have hundreds of billions. And from the perspective of the reliability of euro as a reserve currency, it would be a blow to reliability, and maybe some countries would decide to shift their resources to other countries to take them away from the territory of EU. Not that good argument, simply because, well, US is not afraid about that, and the argument there is that where could you take your money? If G7 adopts such a decision, you wouldn't have any other jurisdiction within the family of developed countries ready to accept the funds. So that argument is not that valid. Of course, this is reputationally wise. We need to consider that. You need to consider that. EU need to consider that. But if there is a compromise between G7 countries, I do not consider this to be a valid argument. There are other arguments like European countries shall be cautious since Russia would start confiscation of the assets of the European companies. Again, good argument, but anyway, they started that process even without waiting of confiscation of sovereign assets. This is happening. And European companies already trying to leave like Russian market by selling assets for $1 or for nothing. And well, this is just something we need to accept, since you cannot deal with Russia and do business there without risks to lose your assets on their territory. And of course, there are plenty of Russian companies operating in the EU. If Russia will start to confiscate Russian private sector businesses assets, then similar approach could be taken, for instance, with regards to Russian SOEs operating within Europe or in other developed countries. And Russian SOEs are pretty big, like Rosatom dealing with nuclear power station, pretty much rich company, and the same applies to many others. So again, there is plenty of different arguments and counter arguments. What we see right now, and we discuss with our partners, is what is lacking. There is a pressure from different headquarters, political pressure. It's here, and I spend quite a lot of my time personally meeting with different officials, persuading them to move forward. There is a kind of explanation and assessments of prominent lawyers that this is doable, this is necessary, we need to move forward. What is lacking is, well, this public support and public opinion. We see, I personally see some articles, some, don't know, some activities to put this idea on the agenda in different jurisdictions, but our assessment shows that we need more of that. The more voices we will have on our side, the more successful we will be. And it's not a matter of only values, meaning like reparations paid. It's a matter of survival of Ukraine, particularly 2025. This is important. This is crucial. This is not about only reconstruction. This is also about winning the war or saving the country. That is kind of major message we have, and that is what we want to put on the table and have sort of discussion over that and how we could move forward and support that initiative. That's it from my side. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I think it's a good setting of the scene for our discussion. I have a lot of questions myself, but let us proceed with our speakers, and afterwards, I think we will have a lot of discussion. I would like to give floor to Nicolas Véron, Senior Fellow of Bruegel and Peterson Institute for International Economics. Nicolas co-founded Bruegel in Brussels in 2002 and joined the Peterson Institute for International Economics in Washington, D.C. in 2009, and currently employed on similar terms by both organizations as a senior fellow. Nicolas, my question is maybe about what was Minister mentioning about crucial year of 2024 to just understand where we are about these sovereign assets, if 2025 is a year when we need them for our budget, for our reconstruction, and maybe for military assistance. So in your optics, what do you see here in Europe? What a major pro and con of this process? I would be glad if you can ground your intervention around 5-7 minutes.
Thank you so much. I'll try to earn the side of brevity and keep it at 5 minutes. I think the minister framed it exactly right. This is about the Ukrainian resources for survival and for winning the war. We can have a long discussions about moral arguments and the long term, but what is important is for the Ukrainian government to have the resources it needs to keep the war effort going, not only in 24, but in 25, in 26, and whatever the duration of the war turns out to be. So I would also add, this is maybe obvious to everybody in this room, that the flip side of that is to deny Russia resources. So if there was a difference from the perspective of the Putin regime between confiscation and immobilization, I think we should move from immobilization to confiscation right away. As we know, there is no difference. For the Putin regime, immobilization and confiscation are the same things. They don't have access to the resources. So that's out of that equation. But for Ukraine, of course, Ukraine needs a resource to fund its government needs, and that's an imperative for the EU. Let me remind everybody that the EU was the main player effectively in the decision to immobilize that money. Russia had anticipated that the US, the UK, probably Japan, certainly Canada, Australia would immobilize assets. That's why they put all their assets into the EU and at Europe here. So the actors that surprised Russia, surprised Mrs. Nabiullina, and allowed us to have this enormous stash of money under our custody was the EU decision. I think Mario Draghi and Ursula von der Leyen deserve much of the credit for that, probably other leaders that I should mention here. And the EU had a slow start in giving budgetary support to Ukraine. There were embarrassing delays that were very harmful in 2022 in providing macro-financial assistance. But since then, the EU has gotten its house in order. And basically, despite the delay introduced by Mr. Orban a few months ago, the EU has been there, honoring its pledges to provide macro-financial assistance to the Ukraine budget. So I think that's very important to keep in mind. Unfortunately, as we know, the US is delayed in its decision for their part of the assistance framework right now in Congress. We all hope this will come to an end, but we don't know. I want to again insist on the fact that after a difficult start, the EU has been doing its bit in the framework that was agreed by Ukraine's supporters. And now it's doing more with the Euroclear income. That's a good decision. I support it. I agree with the ministers that it's too small to make a huge difference in the big scheme of things, but it should be welcome. So essentially what I'm saying is that the EU needs to ensure that the Ukraine government budgetary needs are covered, and maybe more of the coverage of the war effort, depending on what happens in the US. We all know that there is an election in the US this year. The US needs to make sure that the Ukrainian government can keep paying their bills. That's the imperative. And I think the EU is willing to do that and ready to do that. As for how to finance it, to keep the current pattern of financing or to take this radical step of confiscating Russian reserves, I think this decision should be left to the EU, frankly, as long as the EU does what it has to do to support Ukraine. So far, the EU has made a decision, which I support, basically boiling down to the recognition that there are more downsides than upsides to confiscating assets, and that it's better to fund the Ukrainian effort with EU resources, which means EU taxpayers' money. I think under the current circumstances, that's the best choice. I hope that the EU will expand its support to Ukraine using EU taxpayers' money going forward. And I suspect that the EU will need to expand its financial assistance going forward. That doesn't necessarily mean that confiscation is the only way to go. That's the point I want to insist on. I think the EU should be left with the discretion of choosing the best way to fund the Ukrainian effort as long as the EU does fund the Ukrainian effort. And of course, we all think of reconstruction, but that's after the war. And I think the minister was very correct and wise to distinguish between the immediate needs of the war effort and the future needs of reconstruction, which depend on too many parameters for us to be sure about them right now. Let me stop there. Thank you again very much to the EPC and its Ukrainian partners for the invitation today.
Nicolas, thank you so much for your intervention. A lot of things we take with us. Now we are going further with our floor, and now I would like to ask Olena Halushka, chair at the International Center for Ukrainian Victory. Prior to that, Olena was board member of Ukrainian NGO and is Ukrainian NGO Anti-Corruption Action Center, and earlier was chief of International Advocacy for Post-Maidan Coalition of 80 civil society organizations reanimation package of reforms. Olena also now leads one of the advocacy campaign, which is Make Russia Pay, which is dealing with all the issues we are mentioning now. Olena, my question is to you. Minister mentioned about public support and public opinion moving across different countries and continents. What do you encounter? How this message is received?
Thank you very much. It's my very big honor and pleasure to be here at this panel discussion. And to be honest, just a few minutes before the beginning of this panel discussion, I've seen the new article on Politico EU, where the European Central Bank official, basically from the Latvia, said that EU will have to seize Russian assets eventually if it wants Ukraine's victory. And I think that what is significantly changing right now, and this is also kind of partly answer to your question, is that over the first almost 2 years of the full-scale war, the question of confiscation was considered pretty much in a vacuum. And it was put on the shoulders of the bureaucrats and international lawyers, civil servants in the financial institutions, who had a kind of a pretty narrow point of view, given the specificity of their work. However, presently we are witnessing the challenges that do not give us the privilege to be considering this confiscation detached from reality, because what is happening with the US aid is extremely worried. And when people are saying that we have to think about the outcome of the US elections, I mean, we are still half a year before the elections, and unfortunately, new package cannot go through the Congress for almost half a year, well, basically more than half a year already. So we are traveling a lot across Europe currently and asking our European partners what is Plan B of the sustainable aid for Ukraine in case of protracted war. And we were asking this in 2022 as well, 2023, when we were advocating for maximum weapons, for modern battle tanks to arrive for the Kharkiv and Kherson counteroffensive before Russia managed to build those complicated defense lines they successfully did in 2023. That in the protracted war, this, I mean, Ukrainian self-defense would be super expensive. But we heard, that, oh, it's not a matter of money. We would be able to provide sufficient resources to stand as long as it takes. Unfortunately, this is not the issue anymore. And despite the fact that I agree with Mr. Nicolas that I would want, the partners to continue supporting us, I mean, it's getting more and more complicated to the taxpayers to explain why they need to continue supporting Ukraine's fight. If there are no significant changes on the battlefield, and you have to explain that this is an existential fight. And if Ukraine stops defending, that would mean more occupation, more genocide, more tortures, and all of the terrible things that are happening in the occupation. So, when the journalists are interviewing the European Central Bank or other financial officials, because they are usually the most skeptical regarding the confiscation, I think that it's fair if they are asked the questions on what would be the implications on the stability of, first of all, euro, because that's the same continent, if Ukraine is defeated. Because that would mean immediately tens of millions of new refugees. That would mean, immediately inflated costs of the defense of Europe and spending of the defense budget, and even the threat of the direct war. So I think that when we are considering confiscation, we have to put many things on the table and discuss different alternative scenarios. So the public opinion is changing as we are pulling this question out of the bureaucratic debate and putting it on the political debate, because that has to be the political decision, because it's up to the, Chancellor's office, Elysee, White House, to discuss, to assess the potential scenarios and what would be the implications of each and every. And the more it is being debated, discussed, in media, in the parliaments, I would say that the more traction this topic is getting. And here I think that Dr. Patrick will speak a lot about our experience in Germany, because we cooperate on how to discuss and how to explain this matter, particularly in Germany as one of the key decision-making country within European Union. But I want to briefly touch two issues. First one, we welcome very much the ongoing debates in the European Union on windfall profits, despite the fact that we think that it's not enough. It's an important step forward. We think that we have to stress that it shouldn't substitute full confiscation, but we be on the way towards full confiscation. And we welcome very much that most of the profits would be directed at military assistance, because that's our top priority and our top need. However, we think that maximum of this profits should be sent to Ukraine, and that regards also the profits for 2022 and 2023. We know that what is generated already is more than 5 billion euros. We know that European Union decided to keep most of them for the Euroclear reserve. we do not contest that such reserve should be established and Euroclear should keep some part of money for their risks. But we question, the quantity, because this 5 billion euros is already generated. It's a pretty low-hanging fruit, and it amounts to almost a year of the IMF program. So that's quite a lot of money. And keeping them for the reserve for some future risks, I mean, from our perspective, while Ukraine desperately needs this money already today, it's not a right move. I mean, we looked into different figures, and what we've seen from the Euroclear, that they announced that for the 3 quarters of 2023, they got the losses and some lost income because of the frozen assets amounting to 34 million euros. So from our perspective, 34 million euros and 5 billion euros, it's a kind of incomparable when Ukraine is in dire need for this money. So we continue advocating for getting big part of the past profits for Ukraine as well. And the second important point is, of course, we want full confiscation to be implemented. We think that legal scholars, international law scholars, including the one from Europe, there was this document posted by the Bloomberg a while ago, and that what minister also said, that as the countermeasure, there is the solid ground to move forward. But we know the different intermediary options are also discussed, like using this as the collateral or, the guarantee for the loan. What is important is to make sure that if some kind of intermediary solution is put forward, it needs to have important safeguards to make sure that, this loan, this debt won't be put at the shoulders of Ukrainians in case if, let's say, Russia doesn't want to pay reparations or anything like that. So it is important that if our partners decide to move forward with anything in between, important safeguards should be put in place to make sure that Ukraine is not getting additional debts, because we are already having a lot of debts for the war, which we never chose, existential war, where we are defending ourselves, and while other dictators are watching very closely, taking notes and planning their own contests and adventures in other regions. So it's time to finally start talking to them from the stance of strength. Thanks.
Olena, many thanks for a clear picture, and many thanks for your advocacy you are running at the moment. All the best with your activity. I think we all in Ukraine need it. And now you already have made the bridge with Dr. Patrick Heinemann, lawyer and partner in Bender Harrer Krevet law firm, and he is a senior partner on restructuring, performance and transformation and transaction team in Stuttgart. Patrick Heinemann holds an MBA from European Business School and Garvin School of International Management, and he also holds a doctorate in management and accounting. If I may, to start with the question about a legal perspective, Mr. Maliuska mentioned that on this level, we have more or less arguments which are solid, but how these arguments are perceived in Germany? This is question number one. And second, do you feel that German government is still fearful of the retaliation from Russian side in one way or another? Please, the floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for having me. In Germany, there is a discussion. I wish the discussion would be a little bigger on this, but Olena and I have been to different talks in Berlin, and I think that indeed the opinion is changing at the moment. Traditionally, German lawyers are very conservative, and they're not really known for thinking out of the box. So also in Germany, we have a big tradition of being afraid of Russia, which is, yeah. nothing I need to nothing I need to lecture you about, I think. Well, for starters, one main thing one needs to keep in mind is that Russia, well, because of its illegal war of aggression, Russia already owes Ukraine money right now, and this is just it's a provision of under the international law of state responsibility that Russia already owes Ukraine money, and the question really is, how is Ukraine going to get that money? The thing is, you can't just go to a Ukrainian court and file a lawsuit against the Russian Federation, or do the same thing in Germany, because it's not going to work, because that's a matter of state immunity, really. Something that's not a matter of state immunity is if other countries, such as Germany or Belgium, the US, Western countries, could confiscate the Russian central bank's assets by an act of law. That's not a matter of state immunity, because it's true, the Russian central bank's assets, they most likely enjoy state immunity, but state immunity does not protect those assets from being confiscated by an act of law. State immunity only limits a country's sovereignty in terms of their judiciary. So a national court of law could not order to confiscate Russian state bank's assets, but you could do this by enacting an act of law by parliament. Another thing is Russian central bank's assets have been, or the Russian central bank's assets have been frozen in the EU 2 years ago. And if these assets were somehow untouchable because of the principle of state immunity or any other principle, the EU would not have been allowed to freeze them in the first place. So it's just, I think it's a matter of logic, really. You know, if they've already been frozen, and now we're talking about confiscating the profits. But all the arguments made why it's supposedly illegal to confiscate the assets themselves could also be applied against confiscating the profits. In other words, in my opinion, it makes no legal difference. You could just as well freeze not only the profits now, but also the assets themselves. And concerning German constitutional law, it's actually a no-brainer, because neither the Russian Federation nor the Russian Central Bank enjoys basic rights under the German constitution. So even if German parliament were to make a law which would confiscate the Russian Central Bank's assets, neither the Russian Central Bank or the Russian Federation could take this law to the National Constitutional Court of Germany, because it's impossible that such an act of law could violate any fundamental basic rights, because the basic rights or fundamental rights, they're supposed to protect citizens, not states. And this kind of concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now we have the round of interventions, and we are back to questions and comments. Let me start from myself. Sorry for abuse, my role moderator. But I would like maybe to put some questions which I found from discussion and from already the speeches made. The first issue is about this process about collateral, which we can find in different jurisdictions. It's also mentioned by some US politicians. We also hear such voices from United Kingdom. What's your take on that, Denis? Do you think it's a way out of the situation for time being as an intermediary process? Or should we propose other approaches, taking into consideration that we all focus ourselves on these sovereign assets?
That is a good question. With regards to collateral, again, I'm a lawyer. So from my perspective, there is the option of confiscation, sending money to Ukraine. There is an option of sending your European taxpayers' money to Ukraine, like budgetary resources to Ukraine as a grant or as a loan, doesn't really matter. And an idea of using Russian sovereign funds as a collateral depending on the type of a collateral, would be either first option or the second option. Since if you take any asset as a collateral, then probably that means that you can actually use and take away the ownership, meaning you can have confiscation, but somewhere in the future later on. So that would mean that confiscation is possible. And if confiscation is possible, why not outright confiscation, but why to choose collateral? And the option when there would be a collateral, some sort of, but the funds will be provided in a way of bonds when Ukraine issues bonds on the market, and those bonds are covered by the guarantee from G7 countries. And G7 countries would understand that there is some sort of a collateral. Technically, there is a small difference between ordinary guarantee and guarantee with a collateral of Russian sovereign assets. So from that perspective, it's the option of a collateral is a good one for Ukraine. Like from our perspective, doesn't really matter the type of the vehicle our partners will use to provide us with resources. So we are fine with that. But from the legal perspective, it looks like probably this is rather a political option to calm down some skeptics, to tell them that we are not confiscating today, but we will do that at some point later on, maybe in several years, and we'll see how it goes. Russia will not fight a war for years, so maybe they will voluntarily agree on some sort of a framework. So it's a measure to postpone a bit a difficult decision, but still from the legal perspective, there is a little difference, and collateral changes little in the options we have right now. But given political attractiveness of that option, we would gladly take it and use it, and we would support that idea fully.
Thank you so much. I have other questions in my sleeve, but it will be crime because I have full house here. So please, name yourself and question, maybe to whom from our 4 speakers, because all the available, yep.
I'm sorry, we can't hear it.
Hey, thank you. I won't repeat my name. I think it's clear. Right. I think I haven't heard a variant of this discussion about basically taking the interest rate, which technically, of course, is now done in the form of a special, very high Belgian tax, and basically having a political arrangement or agreement that this tax will not go away within the next X years, and then use the interest rates that are being skimmed with this special tax law to basically pay the interest of a major loan that would be raised on the private market, with the principle of with the assets themselves not being touched as a collateral. And that would raise technically roughly at least 250, if not 300 billion, that would be available immediately to Ukraine. Downside is, of course, that all the interest rate, all the revenue from the tax would then go into financing the interest rates of the ongoing loan. But the thing is, you need the money now, and you need a lot of money to buy weapons. So that's the idea. Has this been discussed? Is this being considered? Because I think it's a relatively sexy proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. That is good idea, like a good urgent solution, I would say. We've never discussed it in detail, since we are not in that situation right now that we need such an urgent solution. But the interest could be covered by this tax raised by Belgian authorities. But what will happen with the principal amount? Sooner or later, we will have to pay that debt. And given the amount we have right now, and we have already some calls from expert community to negotiate existing issuance of bonds to reconstruct, to ask for reconstruction of the debt, at least articles appeared in the media. So that is an open question, still an open question for us to increase our debt significantly, given the numbers we already have, and that will put also a huge question on sustainability of our debt and our debt policy. But again, as an urgent matter, that could work. And again, returning back to Belgium, just to put small correction about 5 billion euros mentioned before as profits already collected since 2022. I haven't heard that those 5 billions are going to be used as a buffer to protect Euroclear. The buffer is expected to be put in place, even without the mechanism which is expected to be adopted soon with regards to windfall profits. The buffer will be significantly lower than 5 billion. And the problem with those 5 billions of profits already collected is that EU probably will not decide to apply the regulation retroactively. And the message would be that Belgium is free to legislate on what to do with those profits already collected, those 5 billion. So it's still a question either to EU to allow retroactive application, even if it could be called retroactive application, or to Belgian authorities to decide whether to use this tax scheme or to decide on a mechanism similar to what would be adopted on the EU level. That's an open question still. And again, technically that would be Belgian budgetary money, not Ukrainian money, not the funds of EU, but up for the Belgian government to decide. But again, this is some sort of a topic for discussion here, since we're in the capital of Belgium.
Obviously, I didn't want to go into details, but the idea is, of course, that this is a long-term loan, that the payment on the interest will only start, the payment on the principal would only start in 6-7 years' time. And then one could obviously also think about, because this money would need to be raised on the capital market, we would obviously need more collaterals, and those collaterals could be given in the form of state guarantees, which again wouldn't be from the EU member states. A pool of EU member states, and that wouldn't not from the EU itself as an institution, but a pool of EU member states. And that itself wouldn't necessarily be a political liability for the budget itself, because it would just be a guarantee and it wouldn't actually be a liability to the ongoing budgets. So that's the idea. Thanks.
Yeah, indeed. The guarantee, that makes this option doable, viable. Yeah, that is under discussion. Probably there will be a G7 discussion later on in summer, and that would be a part of the discussion at the table.
Peter Allemon, I'm from the advocacy team of Promote Ukraine. I'm Belgian. I have a question. Thank you very much, Mr. Maliuska, for the very clear analysis about the legal and the financial aspects. I have a question for you and for Mr. Véron. What about the political aspects? Because at the same time as Mrs. Halushka was mentioning, there are articles in Politico. There's also an article published in Politico about Russia now using a grain war, trying to divide European countries. My question is double. First of all, how do you think European partners politically are doing in convincing their own public about the necessity of this? Are they too much afraid about the internal risks being divided and the external risks, Russia moving the money from the EU to the BRICS? And then secondly, just a remark, if it's about Belgian budgetary money, I absolutely agree with what has been said, but then we have to be quick, because there's a serious risk that within the Belgian elections, the new Minister of Finance will not be as benevolent to Ukraine as before. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, to me, at least this is my assessment, that the issue of Russian sovereign assets was not that popular among constituencies in different jurisdictions. So it's not the matter that politicians would be afraid of the reaction or of some politicized actions on the part of Russians or whatever. So it was closed to quite limited discussions. And whenever there would be a public opinion raised, and actually that's what we ask, to raise and make the issue public, since when politicians hesitate, they would listen to the expert opinion or the opinion of constituencies. So that is a matter, and the political message would be really simple. Let's use Russian assets or Russian money to help Ukraine, not European taxpayers. Of course, European taxpayers' money also would be useful. And in terms of Belgium, well, the sooner we get some sort of solution, the better. If there are any ideas how to move forward with that, would be really glad. I personally spent quite a lot of times with meeting with authorities in each and every jurisdiction, including Belgium, with the Prime Minister, Minister of Economy, Minister of Justice. Next week, I will meet with my friends, with my colleagues in France, in Paris. So if there are any ideas or you could help us with raising that issues, putting it higher on the agenda of authorities in different jurisdictions, that would be really helpful and much appreciated. And again, with all sorts of concerns raised by the opponents of the idea, we have counter arguments. It's just a matter of explaining ourselves, maybe, and not limit this discussion to certain myths, which are popular and probably have a support from different allies of Russia here and there.
Nicolas, over to you.
Yeah, I will say something which may or may not be controversial. When we in the European Union use our taxpayers' money to help Ukraine defend itself against Russian aggression, I believe we're sending a stronger political message than if we use Russian money. And for us Europeans, and I'm also a taxpayer in Europe, using our own taxpayers' money is just a way of saying that Ukraine's effort is benefiting Ukraine, of course, but it's benefiting the European Union. This is money well spent by European taxpayers. I should also add that it's not a lot of money, because the Ukraine facility, which, as you know, is intended to be expanded over 4 years, we'll see what happens, represent about 0.3%, so thousands of EU GDP, less than 1,000 per year if you have it over 4 years. It's really not a lot of money. So the EU can afford to spend more for Ukraine, and that is basically unlimited from a Ukrainian perspective, whereas the Russian assets are limited in size, even so it's a big pot of money. So basically what I want to say is this. Confiscating Russian assets is not the only way, the only options that the EU has. The EU has increased, not decreased, its financial support to Ukraine from the initial level in 2022. I think for its own benefit, the EU should be able to increase its support even further. I suspect we will have to do that, and I think this is what we should do for the benefit of Ukraine, for the benefit of the EU, and for the benefit of the world. So I think it would be a mistake, to put it in starker terms, to frame the debate about EU assistance to Ukraine for its defense only in terms of confiscation. I think the EU can do much more than that.
Let's have also Olena to react.
Yeah, I'll briefly add here that I agree that European Union is introducing currently very interesting and out-of-the-box initiatives, like, for example, ammunition coalition, where everybody is throwing money into the pocket, into one basket, which was put forward by the Czech president. or what Baltic states, Estonian government is currently advocating for, to increase the military aid for Ukraine to 0.25% of GDP, and which would basically ensure sustainable long-term assistance for Ukraine. But again, I've been talking a lot to European partners over the last few months, and basically everybody agrees that, you know, even this Ukraine facility, which is a very good instrument, but it was never meant to substitute the American aid. It was, you know, introduced to supplement American aid. And if we do have this loophole with no American aid or much less American aid, that would mean that Europeans who are already doing a lot and who are thinking that they have done already quite a lot would need to contribute it even more. But I think that what I've noticed, kind of a changing of the perception, is that more and more people in Europe start realizing that this is not just a kind of a regional Russian aggression against Ukraine, bilateral thing, but they understand the threat that Russian imperialism is posing towards entire European continent. And here we see statements of German Minister Pistorius, you know, that Europe has to prepare to fight against Russia, or Dutch military commanders, and a lot of other military and defense officials. And here, I think where is kind of Ukraine's window of opportunity is that at this point, you know, many more and more decision makers are waking up to the reality that there might be confrontation with Russia. And there is unique chance to defeat Russia in Ukraine and stop its imperialistic conquest and ambition. And for that, we need maximum resources as soon as possible, because the longer this war goes on, the more complicated it would be for Ukraine to win it. So whether with European taxpayers' money, with Russian frozen assets, all of the resources should be mobilized and directed to help Ukraine win, because our mobilization and manpower potential as well as economy are smaller than Russia's.
And thank you. We have two hands here in middle row, left here in the front. Metro, please.
Dmitry Shkuko, National News Agency of Ukraine. Thank you for the floor. I am not a lawyer, and so excuse me if my question will sound naive. But you know, you mentioned that these Russian assets could be used like at least part of reparations. But you know, there is a very strict stereotype that reparations are paid, then the enemy is defeated. You know, so that. The logical question, what we could consider like Russian to be defeated on the battlefield, or what conditions should be done. And the second question, which is a follow-up to that, anyway, if even such a decision to use that Russian assets as a part of reparation, because damage is much larger than that sum we are speaking about, even that decision should be done with some kind of jurisdiction. So that what kind of international tools could be created or invented to make that possible? Like we, for instance, now trying to create an international tribunal to punish the crime of aggression. Maybe the same should be done for the confiscation of Russian assets. Thanks.
Maybe we just collect a few more questions. Yes, gentlemen in the end of the row.
Hi, hello. This is Gregorio Surge. I'm a journalist at Politico, and I had a question on today's proposal by the European Commission that foresees a 90-10 division between the profits that could be used for military spending and those that could be used for non-military spending. Are you happy with this ratio, or would you have wanted more non-military spending? Since it cannot be vetoed by member states, unlike the EPF. And my second question is on the profits from 22 and 23 that are held by Euroclear. It's not clear to me, what is the Commission's rationale as to why it could not apply this rule retroactively to cover the profits from that were accrued in these 2 years? Because the official reason they gave to us was that it was necessary in order to provide a financial buffer for Euroclear, but that there seems to be a different understanding into what they've told you in this regard. Thanks.
Thank you so much. If we are running over time, let it be the last 4 questions we had for Minister, please.
Okay, so Russia haven't lost yet, true, but this doesn't mean that we cannot get compensation for damages and reparations. That would be rather unique for wars to get compensations during the war without a country paying compensation losing the war, true, but technically there are no barriers to get that compensation. So even it's better than to have them right now than after the war, because this would be not only like this would not only limit resources of Russia, but would also be a deterrence for other countries. They would need to understand when they would launch a war of aggression, there would be consequences, and one of the consequences would be seizure of sovereign assets. So in terms of global security, that would be a good move, and the sooner it's gonna be implemented, the better for the world security everywhere. With regards to the tribunal or other mechanism, we do not see this as necessary. So in many countries, it would be sufficient to legislate on the national level. We do suggest that some sort of a treaty could be concluded in order to provide a framework for but mostly for distribution of assets. So we indeed intend to create a compensation fund that's as a part of our story, which began with creation of register for damages, but still it's not necessary. So for the US, the law would be sufficient, the bill would be sufficient, and even without the bill, administration could leave sovereign immunity without the bill, but it is just a matter of how to send it and to protect from other creditors. So we do not see the necessity to create any tribunal or sort of court to resolve any dispute. This is pretty much clear case. With regards to the distribution of the proceeds, the decision which will be taken by the EU, whether we are happy or not. Hard to say. I personally talked to my counterparts here, and their analysis, at least their response was that this division is not set in stone, so it is going to be revised, and it could be changed like for the next year, for instance, depending on the circumstances on one hand, and on the other hand, we still do not understand clearly enough what is more urgent, military assistance or budget support for this year. Quite a lot depends on the supplemental bill considered by US Congress. So in case we do not get necessary military assistance from the US, of course, our urgent need would be military assistance. If we do not get from them budgetary assistance, of course, our priority would be financial budgetary assistance. So from our perspective, it's not really clear at this stage what is more necessary and more urgent, and we do not intend to have any disputes over that. If EU believes that this proportion is better, fine with that, but we will have additional discussions down the road about our necessity, and we don't have any disputes over that. And with regards about the buffer, again, I haven't heard, I never heard that 5 billion is a buffer for Euroclear. It's too big amount of money to be a buffer. I do not expect such an amount of losses could be foreseen in case of any litigations on the territory of Russian Federation, or even if you pay lawyers. So probably there is some sort of mistake. What we've heard that there would be a buffer, but buffer, and we would talk about millions of US dollars, yes, but not billions. And the buffer will be included in the future profits and the future division and future scheme of sending money to Ukraine, but not with historical approach. With regards to retroactive application, you could ask any lawyer, and any lawyer would tell you that retroactive application of the law is problematic, and there are very limited circumstances under which regulations is allowed to apply retroactively. Whether this is a case of retroactive application, if 5 billion are covered by regulation, I do not really know, and I do not. In different jurisdictions, retroactive application is allowed differently. There are different rules of retroactive application, and I'm not really sure whether it's gonna be retroactive applications. What I know for sure that there was a heated discussion within the European Commission, and that sort of a discussion, the result of that sort of a discussion was that the regulation will apply only to the profits in the future. I was not participating in that discussion, so I do not know the detailed arguments. My assessment is that probably the buffer, 5 billion is not a buffer.
Thank you so much. And I see that Mr. Heinemann wants to contribute, please.
Thank you. There's two issues I'd like to address here. First, it's true traditionally when two countries fight against each other in a war, at the end of the war, when there's an armistice, they sit down and have talks, and there is a peace treaty. The peace treaty also addresses the question of reparations, but that doesn't mean that Russia does not own Ukraine any reparations until there is a peace treaty. That's what I've been trying to say earlier on. Under the international law of state responsibility, Russia owes reparation already now, this very day. So, and the thing that this is without precedent doesn't mean that it's illegal or it can't be done. I mean, the whole situation that we're facing with Russia having billions of dollars and euros abroad is very unique anyway. So it's not a surprise that there's no precedent really. And the other issue I'd like to address is under international law, as far as I know, and as far as I've done my research, there is no provision requiring the injured state to use the reparations for any certain purpose. For example, reconstruction or military purposes whatsoever. So, I mean, and that doesn't come as a surprise to me because the basic idea behind the international law of state responsibility is that Russia would actually have to pay Ukraine reparations. And I mean, just the idea of Russia telling Ukraine what to do with their money they're owing or Ukraine is quite hilarious, I think. So no, it's up to Ukraine under international law to decide what they want to do with the reparations or, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. With this, I have to call it today because basically I think that we overrun what we planned, but it was, I think, dynamic discussion with many dimensions, legal, political, financial. What I can say only to wish good luck to Minister and his team in this very noble but very difficult job. It's good luck for all of us because we know that we all need this money, these assets to survive. And let us all bear in mind what Denis mentioned in the beginning, that 2025 is a crucial year for these assets to work already for Ukraine. Thank you so much. Good evening. And I think that all our speakers deserve a round of applause.